Chapter 4. The Great Oz. As soon as Dorothy and the lion opened their eyes, they lost no more time and immediately set off in the direction where the sky was turning green. The Emerald City could already be seen there on the horizon. On the way, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman told them all about the poisonous poppies and how the field mice had helped them. Both Dorothy and the lion felt thankful to the mice and happy to be so close to the end of their journey. It did not take them long to reach the green walls of the Emerald City. They stopped at a big gate and rang the bell. They were let in by a little man wearing green from head to toe, including a green pointed hat. "I am the guardian of the gates," he said in a serious voice. "What do you wish to do in the Emerald City?" "We want to see the Great Oz," answered Dorothy politely. "Could you show us the way?" "Certainly," said the guardian of the gates, trying to look as important as he could. "But first you must put on these glasses," he added, opening a big box full of different sizes of green glasses. "But why?" asked Dorothy. "Because if you don't wear these glasses, the fantastic brightness of the Emerald City will blind you. Even those who live in the city have to wear the glasses night and day." As he was saying this, he took out 5 pairs of glasses from his box. "Now," he said, "I'll lock them onto your heads and then unlock them when you want to leave the city." Then he put 1 pair over Dorothy's eyes and locked them at the back of her head with a small key. Then he lifted a pair round each of the others' heads, and even little Toto got his own pair. Once that was done, they all followed the guardian into the streets of the Emerald City. He led them through green streets with green houses and green shops until they reached a huge building whose walls were shining with the largest emeralds in the city. It was the palace of the Great Oz. A soldier in a green uniform with a long green beard was guarding the door. "These strangers would like to see the Great Oz," the guardian of the gates told him. The soldier nodded his head and asked them to wait while he himself would go and tell the Great Oz they had arrived. They had to wait a very long time before the soldier finally returned. "The Great Oz will see you all," he said, "but each of you must come and see him on their own, and he will only see one of you each day." The 5 friends nodded their heads as politely as they could. "So," the soldier added, "you must stay at the palace for some days. Let me show you your rooms." They all followed the soldier and soon found themselves in beautiful green rooms, where all the furniture was made of different size emeralds. Dorothy, Toto, and the lion were still very tired and immediately fell asleep. Only the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, who never slept, stood in the corner of their rooms all night, thinking about the Great Oz. The next morning after breakfast, Dorothy was called as the first one to see the Great Oz. Her friends smiled at her encouragingly and wished her luck. The soldier led her through a labyrinth of emerald rooms and corridors until they finally reached the throne room. Through this door, Dorothy had to go alone. When she went in, she found herself in the biggest and the greenest room she had ever seen in her life. In the middle of the room stood a large throne, and in the middle of the throne sat an enormous head. It had no body attached to it, and no hair on it. It looked like a giant egg with eyes and a nose and a mouth, and it spoke in a deep voice. "I am Oz, the great and terrible. Why do you want to see me?" "I am Dorothy, and I have come to ask you for help." The head raised its eyebrows and looked carefully at Dorothy. Then it said, "Where did you get the silver shoes?" "From the Wicked Witch of the East, when my house fell on her and killed her." Said the voice. "And where did you get that shiny mark on your forehead?" "The Good Witch of the North kissed me when she sent me to you." Said the voice. "And what do you wish me to do?" "Send me back to Kansas to my Aunt Em and Uncle Henry. I'm sure they're terribly worried." And then Dorothy told the Great Oz about the cyclone and her adventures in the land of Oz. "Well," said the great head when she finished, "I will send you to Kansas, but first you must do something for me." At this point the head paused, and after a moment he explained, "Kill the Wicked Witch of the West." "But I cannot," exclaimed Dorothy in great surprise. "Why not?" said the head with a wicked smile. "You have already killed one witch, and now you just need to kill another. Then I will send you back home." Dorothy left the throne room with tears in her eyes. She was led back to her room, where her friends were all waiting for her. They were all very sorry to hear what the Great Oz said, and they all wondered what he would say to them. The next morning, the Scarecrow was called to see the Great Oz. He had already prepared himself for the sight of a giant head, so great was his surprise when he was welcomed by a beautiful lady who spoke in a sweet singing voice. When he told his story and said that his greatest wish was to have some brains, the lady answered, "Very well. If you help Dorothy kill the Wicked Witch of the West, I will give you brains so good that you will be the wisest man in the land of Oz." The Scarecrow left the throne room and joined his friends, feeling very sad. "This Oz might be great, but she needs a heart as much as the Tin Woodman," was his first comment. The next morning, the Tin Woodman was called into the throne room. He wondered whether he would see the head or the lady, but he saw neither. Instead, on the throne sat a giant monster-like beast, which spoke in a series of roars rather than words. Once he got used to the sight of the beast, the Tin Woodman told his story and explained that his greatest wish was to have a loving heart. "Right," roared the beast. "I will give you a heart, but first you must help Dorothy kill the Wicked Witch of the West." When the Tin Woodman reported to his friends what had happened in the throne room, none of them had any doubts that the Cowardly Lion would hear the same answer the next day. They were not mistaken. The next morning, the lion entered the throne room to see a giant ball of fire. The hair stood up on his great neck and shoulders, and his heart began to beat very fast. In a small, trembling voice, he told his story and asked the Great Oz for some courage. A low, hissing voice came with an answer from the ball. "You shall have it, but only if you help Dorothy kill the Wicked Witch of the West." Chapter 5. The Wicked Witch of the West. The next day, the 5 friends had their last breakfast at the palace. They were not in the happiest of moods. "There is only one thing we can do now," said the Scarecrow finally, "and that is to go to the yellow land of the Winkies and destroy the Wicked Witch of the West." They all nodded their heads sadly and decided to start on their journey as soon as possible. The soldier showed them the way back to the gates, and there they were met by the Guardian. He unlocked their glasses and carefully put them back into his box. "Thank you very much," said Dorothy. "And could you tell us which road leads to the Wicked Witch of the West?" "There is no road," answered the Guardian, greatly surprised. "No one ever wants to go that way." "Oh," said Dorothy. "How can we find her then?" "That will be easy," said the Guardian with a polite bow. "When she knows you are in her land, she'll find you herself and make you her slaves. For the time being, just keep to the west, where the sun sets." With this not very encouraging advice, the Guardian opened the gates for them and let them out of the city. Our friends were not easily put off, though. They marched toward the west, admiring the landscape of the Emerald Country ruled by the Great Oz. But in the evening, the ground became less pretty and more hilly. They guessed they had entered the yellow land of the Winkies. In the distance, to the west, a range of high yellow mountains could be seen, and the 5 companions started to wonder how they would ever get over them. It was then that they were first seen by the Wicked Witch of the West. Every day she sat on the doorstep of her yellow castle in the mountains and looked around to see what was happening in her country. She had only one eye, but it was as good as a telescope, and she could see with it as far as the most distant corner of the land of the Winkies. With this eye, she saw Dorothy and her friends walking in the direction of the castle. The Wicked Witch trembled with anger. She stood up and went up to her cupboard and took out a golden cap. The cap had a very special power. The person who had it could call 3 times on the winged monkeys, who would obey any order that they were given, even the most terrible one. But no person could call these strange creatures more than 3 times. The Wicked Witch had already used the golden cap twice, once when she made the Winkies her slaves, and the second time when she fought a great battle against Oz himself. As she looked at Dorothy, a strange suspicion came to her head that something very dangerous could happen. She saw she had no choice but to call on the winged monkeys again. So she put the golden cap on her head and said slowly, Epi, Pepi, Kaki, Hilo, Holo, Hello, Zizi, Zuzi, Zik. At the same moment, the sky darkened, and a crowd of winged monkeys started to land around the witch's castle. Their leader stopped right in front of the witch and said in a nasty, screeching voice, half speaking, half laughing, You have called us for the third and last time. What do you want us to do? Go to the strangers who came to my land and destroy them all, apart from the lion. He will serve me as a horse, ha ha ha. The winged monkeys immediately flew to where Dorothy and her companions were getting ready for the night's rest. When the group of friends saw the monkeys about to attack, they started to run, but they could not get away. Some of the monkeys caught the scarecrow and pulled all the straw from his clothes and his head and threw it on the top of the highest tree in the land of the Winkies. Some other monkeys caught the woodman and carried him to the sharpest rocks and dropped him there so many times that his whole body was so bent and twisted that he could not move or say anything. But they dared not touch Dorothy or Toto when they saw the shiny mark on the girl's forehead. So both her and the lion were carried back to the wicked witch's castle. There they sat them down in front of the witch. We have obeyed you as far as we could, said the leader, pointing meaningfully at the mark on Dorothy's head. And now your power over us has ended. And the next moment, the laughing and screeching band flew up in the air and were soon out of sight. When the wicked witch saw the shiny mark on Dorothy's forehead and her silver shoes, she knew that she would not dare hurt her either. But then she looked into Dorothy's eyes and saw that the little girl did not know the power she had or how to use it. So with a nasty smile, she said in a voice most terrible, Your job will be to clean my kitchen, and be careful to do it well, or you'll end like the Scarecrow or the 10 Woodmen. Dorothy trembled with fear and got down to work immediately. The wicked witch looked very pleased and went to talk to the lion. But here she was not so easily obeyed. The lion roared at her as terribly as he could, and would not let her even come up to him, not to mention riding him like a horse. If I cannot ride on your back, said the witch, I can starve you. You will have nothing to eat until you do as I tell you. And so the lion was left imprisoned with no food behind the strongest iron bars, while Dorothy had to work hard night and day in the witch's kitchen. Their lives became very sad. The only nice moments they had were when the witch was asleep, and Dorothy quietly went to the iron bars and brought the lion some food, which she had stolen from the kitchen during the day. Then they would sit together and wonder how they should escape, and what had happened to their friends. And sometimes they would just cry together in the greatest unhappiness. The wicked witch spent all her days thinking how she could steal Dorothy's silver shoes. She had used up all the power of the golden cap, and now she needed some more magic. However, Dorothy loved her silver shoes, and she never took them off apart from when she was having a bath. But the witch was terribly afraid of water, and never dared come near Dorothy when she was in the bathroom. The Witch of the West was not only wicked, but also very clever, and she finally thought of a trick which would get her the silver shoes. She came into the kitchen where Dorothy was busily cleaning the floor. There she observed her at work, and then when Dorothy was less careful, she used all her magic spells to make her slip on the freshly cleaned floor. Dorothy fell over, but nothing happened to her. Only one of her shoes flew off her foot. The witch caught it in the air and immediately put it on one of her feet. This made Dorothy really angry. You may be a witch, but you have no right to take my shoe from me, she shouted at the witch. And not thinking much, she took the bucket of dirty water with which she was cleaning the floor and threw the water on the witch, making her wet from head to toe. At this, the wicked witch gave a terrible cry, and to Dorothy's greatest surprise, she started to melt into a brown, dirty puddle. I've been so careful with water all the time, were the witch's last words, but I never thought a little girl like you would melt me so easily. Within a minute, only the silver shoe and the key to the lion's cage were left of the witch. Dorothy picked these up and ran to tell the lion the good news. Chapter 6. The Discovery of Oz, the Terrible. At first the lion could not believe their luck, but when Dorothy showed him the key to his cage and opened the iron door with it, he knew she must be right. The next moment they called all the Winkies to tell them they were from that moment free people and not slaves anymore. The Winkies thought themselves the happiest people in the world and began to sing and dance. "Ah," sighed the lion, looking at the happy Winkies with melancholy. "If only we had our friends here with us." "True," said Dorothy. "Why don't we ask the Winkies to help us?" The Winkies were more than happy to be able to do something for their rescuers. A group of them set off immediately to look for the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow's clothes. 3 days later they were back with what remained of the two friends after the winged monkeys had treated them so terribly. Dorothy and the lion had tears in their eyes and could hardly speak. But soon the Scarecrow was stuffed with the finest straw the Winkies could find, and the best tinsmiths in the land of the West were working on putting the Woodman back into shape again. In a couple of days both friends looked as good as ever, and there was no end to the hugging and celebrating again. But the next day Dorothy said to her friends, "We must go back to Oz and ask him to fulfill his promise." They all agreed, and the next day they were ready to start on their journey. The Winkies were very sorry to see them go. They had grown very fond of them, and especially of the Tin Woodman, whom they asked to stay and rule over them. But seeing how determined they all were to go to Oz, they just asked the Woodman to promise that he would come back and be their king, and then wish them all a safe journey. As Dorothy was packing, she found the golden cap in the witch's cupboard. She tried it on and found that it fitted her perfectly, and strangely matched her silver shoes. She decided to take it. The next morning they set off back to the Emerald City, but the journey was very difficult. There was no road, not even a path through the high mountains. The 5 friends wandered for days and weeks in the steep hills, until they realized that they knew neither the way back to the Winkies' castle nor to the Palace of Oz. They were so tired that they could hardly walk. "Why don't we call the field mice?" said the Scarecrow at last. "They said they'd help us." "What a brilliant idea!" they all said, and began to call on the mice. The next moment the tapping of thousands of tiny feet could be heard, and the fields around them filled with little gray mice. "What can we do for you?" asked their queen in a small voice. "We lost our way, and we don't know how to get to the Emerald City." The Queen of Mice looked at them in surprise. "Why don't you use the charm of the golden cap?" "I didn't know it had a charm," said Dorothy, slightly confused. "It has," answered the Queen. "You can call on the winged monkeys. They'll carry you to the Emerald City in less than an hour. The magic words are written inside the cap," she added. And with this she disappeared, followed by the other gray mice. Dorothy looked into the golden cap and carefully read the instructions inside it. "Epi, pepi, kaki. Hilo, holo, hello. Zizi, zuzi, zik." The next moment the whole band of the winged monkeys was before them. Their leader bowed before Dorothy and asked, "What do you wish us to do?" "Can you carry us to the Emerald City?" asked the girl. "Of course," said the leader, and soon they were all in the air, traveling safely towards the Emerald City. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman still did not feel very safe and insisted on flying as close to Dorothy as possible. Dorothy, on the other hand, felt quite comfortable. Just as the Queen of Mice had said, in less than an hour they were safe at the gates of the Emerald City. The 5 travelers were led into the city by the same guardian of the gates as before, and exactly as before, he locked green glasses on their heads. When they told him that they had destroyed the Wicked Witch of the West by melting her, he bowed low before them and led them immediately to the Palace of Oz. There they were met by the same soldier in a green uniform, who, on hearing the news, opened his eyes very wide and ran immediately to tell Oz about it. In a few moments he was back with an invitation for them to see the wizard that very morning. They followed the soldier through the complicated labyrinth of emerald rooms and corridors, wondering what shape the wizard would take this time. But as they entered the throne room, they saw nobody on the magnificent chair. They only heard a terrible voice coming from that direction. "I am Oz, the great and terrible. Why do you want to see me?" "We have come to ask you to fulfill your promise." "Is the Wicked Witch really destroyed?" the voice asked. "Yes," said Dorothy proudly. "I melted her with a bucket of water." "Well," said the voice, Come tomorrow. I need some time to think it over. You've had plenty of time, said the Scarecrow. The Lion thought that perhaps at this point it would be a good idea to frighten the Wizard a little, and he gave the most terrible roar that he could make. The roar was so terrible that it alarmed Toto, who had never really got used to the Lion's roars, and the poor little dog jumped to the corner and bumped his head on a big screen. The screen fell over, and behind it there stood a tiny old man with big scared eyes and a very wrinkled face. "I am Oz, the great and terrible," he said in a very small voice, "but please do not hurt me." The 5 friends looked at the tiny man in great amazement. "We thought you were a big head, or a lovely lady, or a giant beast, or a ball of fire." "Oh no," said the man sadly, "I was just cheating." "Cheating!" exclaimed Dorothy. "Are you not a great wizard?" "Not a bit, my dear," and he pointed to the corner behind the screen, where there was a big head and a costume of a lovely lady and a giant beast and a half-burnt cotton ball. "Let me explain," said the man. "I was born in Omaha." "That's not far from Kansas," interrupted Dorothy. "No, but very far from here," said Oz sadly. "I grew up in a circus and became a ventriloquist." "Who?" asked the Lion. "It means I can make my voice come from anywhere in this room. That's how I tricked you." "Oh," they all said. "But then I became a balloonist," continued Oz. "My job was to go up in a balloon to advertise a new circus performance. But one day, the ropes holding the balloon broke, and up I went in the air. I couldn't go down again for a very long time, and the next day I woke up very slowly, landing in this beautiful country. The people who saw me coming down from the air thought me a great wizard, and agreed to do anything I told them to do. It amused me greatly, and I asked them to build this city and my palace. The country around it was so green that I called the city the Emerald City. To make it fit its name even better, I ordered everyone to wear green glasses so that they would see everything in green." "Is not everything green in the city, then?" asked Dorothy. "No more than any other city, but it is true that the land is rich and the people are happy here. I have ruled the city justly, and the people like me, though I didn't let them see me for so many years that nobody knows what I look like anymore. But they still believe I am a wizard. And fortunately so did the 2 wicked witches who you have destroyed. Otherwise they would have done away with me long ago. But now that they've been destroyed, and I don't need to fear them anymore, I can honestly tell you I cannot keep the promises I made you." "Can't you give me brains, then?" asked the Scarecrow, looking at the little man with great disappointment. "You don't need them. You're learning something every day, and you're the brightest Scarecrow I've ever heard of." "All the same, I won't be happy unless I have real brains," said the Scarecrow sadly. "Very well," answered Oz after a moment of thought. "Come and see me tomorrow, and I'll stuff your head with some brains." "And what about my courage?" asked the Lion. "True courage is being able to face danger when you are afraid, and that kind of courage you've got plenty of." "Maybe," said the Lion, "but I would prefer to get more of the courage that makes you less afraid of danger." "Very well," said Oz with a sigh. "Come tomorrow, and you'll have it." "And my heart?" asked the Tin Woodman. "Come tomorrow, too," said the Wizard with resignation. "And what about me?" asked Dorothy. "I think there's only one way," answered the Wizard seriously. "We'll have to repair my old balloon, but please, promise me that you won't tell anyone about my secret." Chapter 7. Back Home. The next day, the Scarecrow entered the throne room first. "Ah, yes," said the Wizard as he saw him. Then he opened the Scarecrow's head and took out all the straw from it. Then he filled it with a mixture of straw and pins and needles, and put it back onto the Scarecrow's body. The Scarecrow felt very wise immediately. He thanked Oz and left the room while the Tin Woodman entered it. "Yes," said Oz as he saw him. "I'll have to make a hole in your chest first, I'm afraid." "That's fine," said the Woodman. "It won't hurt me." So Oz made a small hole in the Woodsman's chest, and then went to his drawer and took out a pretty red heart made of silk and stuffed with cotton. He put it into the Woodsman's chest and closed the hole. The next moment, the Tin Woodman felt like the most kind-hearted person in the world. He thanked Oz and went out. At the same moment, the Lion came in. "Yes, your courage," said Oz. "Here it is." He took out a small bottle and poured some green liquid from it into a bowl. "You'll have to drink it," he said. The lion did not hesitate a moment, and the bowl was empty within seconds. His chest immediately rose, and he felt like the bravest animal in the world. As he left the room to share his happiness with the others, Dorothy came in. "Now, my dear," said Oz, "we have to make a balloon. I'll cut some long strips of silk, and you'll sew them. Then, when the bag is big enough, we'll coat its insides with glue, and we'll tie it to a large basket. Then we'll make a fire and fill the bag with hot air, and off we'll go." "To Kansas." "I hope so," said Oz, "but first across the desert, and then it should be easier." That was exactly what they did. They worked the whole week to make the balloon, and when it was ready, Oz ordered everyone to spread the message among his people that he was going in a balloon to pay a visit to his brother wizard in the clouds, and during his absence, the Emerald City would be ruled by the wise Scarecrow. The next day, early in the morning, Oz checked all the ropes and got into the basket to wait till the hot air from the fire would lift the balloon. Dorothy was about to get in with him when she realized that Toto was nowhere to be seen. She went to look for him immediately. While she was gone, Oz tied the basket with a rope to the ground and waited for her. She didn't come back for some time, during which the hot air filled the balloon and lifted the basket off the ground. It was starting to pull at the ropes dangerously hard. "Hurry up, dear," shouted Oz as he saw Dorothy running towards him with Toto in her arms. But at precisely that moment, the rope holding the balloon broke, and the basket with Oz was lifted up in the air. "Come back," shouted Dorothy. "I cannot," shouted Oz as he disappeared into the distance. "Goodbye." Dorothy cried all day and most of the night, as she saw no chance of getting back home now. The next morning, however, her friends invited her to the throne room to talk the matter over. The Scarecrow had thought so hard the whole night that the pins and needles began to stick out of his head. As his friends entered the room, he said, "And why don't we call the winged monkeys again and ask them to carry you across the desert?" "A brilliant idea!" Dorothy exclaimed. She took off her golden cap and spoke the magic words. The next moment, the band of winged monkeys flew into the room through the window. "What is your wish?" asked their leader. "I want to go home to Kansas." But the leader shook his head. "That cannot be done. We belong to this country alone." "Is there no one who can help me?" asked Dorothy sadly. "Glinda might," answered the leader. "The Good Witch of the South. She rules the land of the Quadlings." With this, the monkeys flew away. "Right," said the lion. "So when are we leaving for the South?" "Will you go with me?" asked Dorothy. "Of course," answered the Scarecrow and the Woodman in one voice. "We'll always help you, as you've helped us." The next day, they were on their way to the land of the Quadlings. The journey was full of adventures, most of them dangerous, but the 5 friends always helped each other, and at last, after 2 or 3 weeks, they reached the red country of the Quadlings. It was as beautiful as the blue land of the Munchkins, or the emerald land of Oz, except everything was ruby red here, for red was the Quadlings' favorite color. They reached the palace of Glinda, the Good Witch of the South, after another 2 days of very pleasant walking. Glinda was already expecting them. They were invited into a magnificent red room where a beautiful woman, neither young nor old, was sitting on a throne of rubies. She was wearing a white shiny dress, and her hair was a rich red color while her soft eyes were blue. "What can I do for you, my child?" asked Glinda. "I would really like to go back home to Kansas." "I'm sure I can do that," Glinda said with a smile. "But then you'll have to give me your golden cap." "With pleasure," answered Dorothy quickly. "I won't need it any more." "And I will," said Glinda. "I'll ask the winged monkeys to send the wise Scarecrow here back to the Emerald City, where the people already miss their new ruler." The Scarecrow bowed and smiled modestly. "And then," continued Glinda, "I'll ask them to carry the kind-hearted Tin Woodman here to the yellow castle of the Winkies in the west, who can't wait to welcome their new ruler back home." The Tin Woodman smiled happily as he remembered the lovely faces of the Winkies as they were saying their goodbyes to him. "And my third wish to the winged monkeys will be," said Glinda, "to carry the brave lion here back to his forest, where all the animals have elected him to be their king." The lion looked up in great surprise, and suddenly felt he missed his home terribly. "But what about me?" asked Dorothy. "Your silver shoes will carry you across the desert, and wherever you want beyond it. You just have to knock your heels together 3 times and say your wish. That's all. If you had known their power, you could have gone back home the very first day you arrived here. But then I would never have got my brains, said the Scarecrow. Or I my heart, added the Woodman. And I would still have been a coward, exclaimed the Lion. And I would never have made such good friends, said Dorothy, hugging her friends. Then she took Toto in her arms and knocked her heels 3 times and said slowly, "Take me home to my aunt and uncle." At the same moment she was flying through the air faster than during the cyclone, and in a lot more pleasant way. In a few moments she found herself sitting on the gray grass outside the new house that Uncle Henry had built while she was gone. Dorothy stood up and saw she had no shoes on, for the silver shoes had fallen off her feet during her flight and were lost forever in the desert. Aunt Em had just come out of the house and saw Dorothy running towards her. "My darling child," cried Dorothy, covering Dorothy's face with kisses. "Oh, I'm so glad to be home again," said Dorothy.